When American Pickers' Burlesque Queen episode 307 aired in March 2020, fans were unaware that it would be the last time they would see Frank Fritz, the adored co-star who spent 20 years searching for hidden treasures with Mike Wolfe. But let's go back in time and examine this fairly typical day in more detail, because, believe me, what happened wasn't exactly typical. You would assume it was just another pick if you watched this show, wouldn't you? Frank and Mike were prepared to unearth history from a location that most people would not even look at twice when they arrived at this dusty, deserted port in Kansas City, Missouri. But something felt off. Beneath the laughter and jokes, there was a strange tension, an unpleasant feeling. Even though viewers likely ignored it, the clues were clearly visible in retrospect. The marina itself seemed eerie. Rusted signs partly hidden in dirt, boats rotting in dense grass. As usual, Frank was laser-focused, focusing right once on products he knew could turn a respectable profit. If you look attentively, you can see Frank shifting a little, massaging his back, and displaying a faint expression of agony. Frank's health issues were already having a negative impact on the majority of spectators. He was enduring in silence, acting as though nothing was wrong, as that was Frank's nature. Tenacious, strong, and unwilling to give up or slow down. Alongside a modest vintage Kawasaki motorcycle, Frank started negotiating on an ancient Phillips 66 sign. It was difficult to negotiate with the seller. This man was rough, unyielding, and fiercely resistant. Frank, however, kept the price from ever rising above his threshold and matched him blow for blow. Frank finally got the deal done for $2,000 flat. Traditional Frank Fritz was a skilled negotiator. However, if you look attentively at his face right now, you can see that he is tired. Beneath his smile was a weariness. Although it was subtle, it seems almost tragic now that we know what transpired. The pick continues if you keep a careful eye on it. Beneath clutter, Frank discovers an ancient grandfather clock and this vintage Mercury outboard engine logo sign. He skillfully haggles down to barely $750 sheer, pushing once more. Later, fans commented on the internet about how witty and astute Frank was during this pick, as he usually has been. However, as you can see, his breathing was more labored and his laughter was shorter and more forced. Even while Frank was still Frank, he was having difficulties. Looking back, it's brutally obvious, but at the time, none of us could see it properly. Following Frank's untimely demise, fans expressed in their comments how moved they were to see these closing moments. Some claimed that after Frank disappeared from episodes later in season 21, the show never felt the same. Others expressed their need for his sincere affection and his grounded sense of humor. In a heartfelt homage to a celebrity who subtly touched millions with his everyday charm, one viewer even claimed that they purchased a black cat hat just because of Frank. But let's take a moment to go back even farther, because it's not only the scene that makes Frank's final episode so stunning, it's everything that takes place in the background, all of it we never saw. Frank's departure from American Pickers has not yet been announced. In subsequent episodes, Mike Wolfe remained by himself, leaving viewers perplexed, irritated, and ultimately extremely worried. There were rumors, health issues, rivalries, and even accusations of treachery. Now, there's another secret clue tucked very deep within the show's footage of Frank's last selection if you pay close attention. Slower, stiffer motions were minor signs of chronic discomfort for Frank. Recall that although Frank had publicly battled Crohn's disease for years, he hardly ever talked about his back issues. Following his death, Fans who knew him well or closely followed his life on the internet noted that Frank was secretly dealing with serious back problems that had been exacerbated by decades of bending over dusty garage floors, crawling through small barns, and lifting heavy antiques. The condition was harsh and agonizing, especially while performing strenuous labor. According to a fan who knew someone with comparable back problems, Frank kept filming in spite of his discomfort, pushing himself farther and farther every day, possibly too far. Following his departure, fans started making connections online, figuring out that Frank most likely quit showing up because he was physically unable to continue. Frank's back surgery was mentioned in passing by Mike Wolf, but there were few and unclear specifics. But in the shadows, there was another tale. Fans didn't want to acknowledge that it was a darker, more unsettling one. Tension, a feud that had been quietly brewing for years, was the cause of Frank's disappearance. Everyone adored the pair of Frank Fritz and Mike Wolf, inseparable co-stars, best buddies on screen. However, a simmering irritation had taken root behind the laid-back charm. To truly comprehend this drama, you had to go back a few more years before that final choice. Together, Frank and Mike established American Pickers, trudging through people's forgotten trash while traveling thousands of miles in small vans. But a fissure started somewhere along the endless freeways. Frank later disclosed that by 2021, he and Mike had not had direct communication for about 2 years. Why? Because Mike never checked in during Frank's harrowing health struggles, making him feel abandoned. When Frank made his final appearance, did spectators perceive this tension in that marina? And allow me to clarify, things worsen. Frank thought Mike wanted him gone, so his brother Robbie Wolf could take center stage. Was this icy reality or paranoia? Even fans who at first brushed these claims aside found themselves reevaluating previous episodes. Frank and Mike's little exchanges felt abruptly tense. Even harmless jokes now sounded harsh and passive-aggressive. Online, fans vehemently debated who was at fault. Many people strongly supported Frank because they felt he was unfairly punished and misled. Let us now return to the situation. Frank's last choice. Following his death, fans who re-watched this specific episode carefully noted awkward silences and uncomfortable moments that had previously looked innocuous. Was Frank just worn out from suffering? Or were they indications of a broken friendship, steadily disintegrating in real time and being immortalized on film? As you can see, Frank looked away from Mike for a moment, silently watching instead of laughing out. Was Frank already retreating because he felt abandoned or deceived? Nevertheless, the devastating picture of these final events was portrayed by internet fan comments. Many people expressed how agonizing it was to see Frank's last appearance again, recognizing the loneliness and melancholy he would have had off-camera. They lamented the passing of a remarkable individual, an authentic collector, and an approachable commoner whose appeal seemed incomparable. Some claimed that when Frank went, American Pickers was never the same, and that the magic disappeared with him. Frank Fritz passed away 2 years after suffering a terrible stroke, which was even more heartbreaking. Fans are startled and devastated by his fast deteriorating condition. But what most troubled viewers was this last choice, this typical day at a dilapidated port in Kansas City. At first glance, it didn't seem dramatic or shocking. Beneath the jokes, the agreements, and the typical banter, however, was a conclusion that no one anticipated. A silent tragedy that was silently recorded and immortalized on film. But hold on, there's more going on behind the scenes. We must pause for a moment, since Frank's passing affected more than simply his admirers. It unexpectedly thrust Mike Wolf back into the public eye. Frank Fritz and Mike Wolf were more than just co-hosts on television. Since middle school, they had been best friends, becoming virtually brothers as they bonded as children without fathers. However, at some point throughout their voyage, the bond broke down in a way that fans couldn't comprehend. Things began to get messy about 2021. Frank openly criticized Mike for failing to get in touch with him when he was having severe back pain. Frank accused Mike of turning American Pickers into his own one-man show because he felt ignored and marginalized. Frank's direct remarks startled the fans, who began to take sides. It appeared that their friendship would never be restored. Here's the unexpected twist, though. Let's fast forward until 2023. After Frank has a severe stroke, Mike Wolf unexpectedly reappears in his life. Mike gives up everything to be with Frank. Real life. No drama, no scripts, no cameras. Mike discovered Frank in a hospital, weak and fighting for his life. All of Frank's nasty remarks vanished in an instant. Mike no longer gave a damn about getting wounded. He recently witnessed his pal in agony and in need of support. After that, Mike began going to see Frank on a regular basis, discreetly mending a friendship that everyone believed had been irreparably damaged. Frank was fighting more than just health problems, as Mike could now clearly see. Mike was well aware that he had been battling a covert addiction for years. Then, the moment that hits more forcefully than anything else arrived. Mike Wolf was on Frank's side during his last moments. In order to ensure that Frank felt loved and forgiven, Mike held his hand tenderly while silently consoling him and massaging his chest. Think about this for a moment. Two adult males who are well known on TV, but they're just old pals bidding farewell in that peaceful chamber. Mike calmed Frank as he breathed his last breaths by gently telling him to go to his mother, whom Frank missed terribly. And Mike wasn't the only one present. Frank was surrounded by people who genuinely cared for him. Frank's late mother's dearest friend and Mike's own mother. The strain from years of public feuds vanished entirely in those silent last moments. Fans, who had previously harbored resentment toward Mike, were taken aback by the sincere love he displayed when it counted most. It's evident how much Mike Wolf had changed as a result of this catastrophe if we take a step back. He went from being portrayed as a self-centered co-host who drove Frank away to a man who publicly showed forgiveness, encouragement, and consolation to his friend in his hour of need. Mike suddenly understood Frank's scathing remarks from 2021. Frank wasn't actually speaking. They were the words of his suffering and addiction. Mike gave fans one last, priceless moment of friendship by choosing compassion over ego and forgiveness over resentment. The story becomes much more poignant at this point, though. Following Frank's death, Mike disclosed that he had spent many hours at the facility with Frank, telling him memories from their early years and resolving all of their past miscommunications. There were no unspoken or unresolved issues. Mike ensured that Frank understood the extent of his compassion and forgiveness. However, just as fans were beginning to find some closure, they were all taken aback by yet another shocking revelation. It's chaotic, complex, and downright surprising. So allow me to explain. Word of Frank's enormous wealth spread shortly after his passing. Frank Fritz had amassed a staggering $6 million in secret wealth. $6 million indeed. Who would have thought that type of wealth could be made from swapping antiques? Frank did, in fact, earn about $300,000 a season from American Pickers alone, not to mention his Illinois antique store. Frank Fritz Finds, where he made a steady income from vintage motorcycles and rare toys. Frank's investments continued to earn him an additional $60,000 annually even after he left TV. But wait, this is the unexpected turn of events. Frank hardly had time to appreciate it. Why? Because all changed when Frank had a stroke in 2022, necessitating 24-hour care that cost him an astounding $30 a month. You read correctly, $30,000 per month for in-home help and medical expenses alone. Frank's reality TV riches, which he had spent years accumulating, was rapidly depleting, dollar after dollar. If you thought that was already awful, get ready for yet another crazy turn of events. Bill Fritz, Frank's own father, entered the fray shortly after his death on September 30, 2024, and claimed that Frank's will was a complete fabrication, sparking a flurry of controversy surrounding his final desires. Yes, that is a fake. You may be wondering what's going on. Is there something more sinister going on here? Or is this just another depressing celebrity money grab? Let me explain this to you in detail. 8 months after being placed under guardianship, in 2023, Frank allegedly made a legitimate will, according to his friends who helped him following his stroke. According to court documents, a judge formally acknowledged the will on October 18, 2024. Frank's father, Bill Fritz, however, was not amenable to it. In early 2025, Bill swiftly launched a startling lawsuit, seeking that Frank's be thrown out entirely. Why? Because, according to Bill, Frank never signed that will. Claiming that Frank was no longer able to make important decisions, he termed it a flagrant fake. From there, Bill's argument became even more compelling. He claimed to be Frank's only remaining actual family member. Bill said that Frank's friends and caregivers had faked the will in order to take advantage of Frank's wealth. He desired everything. Frank's whole estate, which totals $6 million, including his valuable motorcycle collection, rare antiques that have been gathered over the years, and even his comfortable farmhouse in Iowa, which is valued at $155,000. Bill portrayed himself as a devoted father. He even mentioned how he and Frank used to love family holidays and deep-sea fishing excursions at Bill's place in Street Thomas. Frank's buddies, however, didn't think so. They retaliated forcefully, saying that over the years, Bill hardly interacted with Frank. Bill hadn't even paid Frank more than one visit since the stroke, according to Frank's close friends and family. Here's the real deal. During Frank's most trying times, Bill allegedly refused to assume any guardianship responsibilities. The sudden appearance of Bill and his desire for everything made Frank's friends uneasy. Why do you want complete control over the estate and only show up after Frank's death? You may be asking yourself, who's telling the truth here? Was it too late for Bill, the devoted father, to get back in touch? Or, following Frank's unexpected death, was this merely a callous attempt to extract money? There is even more drama concealed behind the scenes, so let's delve deeper. Bill's legal team made yet another compelling case. According to them, Frank suffered a serious stroke in July 2022 that left him totally unable of taking care of himself, including feeding himself, let alone making crucial legal decisions like drafting a will. Bill's claim was supported by court documents. Frank was placed under a court-ordered guardianship after judges determined that he was profoundly disabled. This decision raised serious concerns about the 2023 will and appeared to significantly confirm Bill's accusations. But hold on, for Frank's allies retaliated with unexpected proof of their own. They maintained that Frank was not a defenseless old man. They asserted that he was intelligent enough to express his final desires intelligibly till almost the end. When Frank penned and signed his contentious will during Memorial Day weekend in 2023, his close pals actually said he was totally clear-headed. This was corroborated by Mike Wolf, who attested to Frank's full awareness and coherence at their emotional reunion that year, their first in 3 years, no less. The legal dispute gets much more heated at this point. Corey Gurley, Bill's attorney, presented startling charges against Frank's pals, claiming that the will wasn't even properly witnessed or signed in accordance with Iowa law. Gurley pledged to provide several arguments for why the will was unenforceable. However, Frank's closest friends and family, who looked after him around the clock, retaliated once again, claiming that the document's legitimacy was established by the court's acceptance. Let's take a moment to realize that this isn't just another legal battle over a famous person's wealth. Frank's buddies honestly thought Bill was attempting to steal Frank's estate. They maintained that Frank spent nearly his whole adult life apart from his father. Frank actually had no close relationships with any biological relatives, as stated in court filings. In ways that his own blood never could, Frank's group of buddies took over and became his adopted family. However, Bill's legal team vehemently disagreed. They contended that Bill was deliberately kept apart from his own son by Frank's buddies following the stroke. Bill said that these caregivers had manipulated Frank's seclusion in order to get him to rebel against his biological family. All of a sudden, this drama was about much more than money. It became a sour argument about who truly knew Frank the best and who truly loved him. A jury trial was requested in Bill's petition. Yes, a full-fledged drama was playing out in the public courtroom. This implied that Frank's last desires would be dissected in public, revealing extremely sensitive information, medical records, and intimate discussions. This upset Frank's close friends. They wanted to quietly and respectfully pay tribute to Frank's legacy by organizing a sincere celebration of his life. Instead, they encountered a legal nightmare where they had to engage in public combat in order to honor Frank's last wishes. As this battle made headlines, fans looked on helplessly. Some backed Bill because they thought he should be able to re-establish a connection with his son's legacy. Others fervently supported Frank's devoted pals, confident that they had made every effort to honor Frank's genuine desires. However, one thing was evident: the death of Frank Fritz sparked an unanticipated storm that left everyone with questions they had never thought to ask. Did Frank's buddies just step up when his family wouldn't, or was he actually duped? This becomes messier the further we go. The legacy of a modest antiques picker who once enchanted millions of people on television is the subject of a catastrophic collision between lawyers, courts, medical records, and million-dollar estates. It's also important to remember that Frank's terrible conclusion wasn't meant to involve accusations, lawsuits, or acrimonious family disputes. It was about paying tribute to a life full of adventure, humor, passion, and priceless moments spent with fans across the United States. But here we are, caught up in this maelstrom of the law. Family members and friends are at each other's throats. Fans were perplexed, shocked, and divided. How did the quiet death of a well-liked TV personality turn into a public display of mistrust and avarice? This is the most difficult question of all. Would Frank even be aware of the disorganized mess his legacy had become? Or would he just shake his head pitifully, wondering how his peaceful hobby of collecting antiques came to be so complicated? There is little doubt that this awful conclusion is not yet complete. Even after his passing, Frank Fritz's story continues to take unexpected turns that continue to astound fans.